Set. I would like to thank ECMS and Dr. Nitin Chawla sir for providing us this wonderful opportunity presenting our own presentations in this webinar form. Today's topic is critical illness neuropathy. Screen is not proceeding. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, sir, but this my presentation on critical illness neuropathy.
You can escape and you can start on the same way like previously while you were able to do it in the PPT format. I think this is slideshow and it is causing some problem, right?
Yes, sir.
No problem. Escape and come out and go slide by slide.
Is it visible, sir?
Yes, it is.
But this will not show the effect of animations and all I had put. But let's proceed. Again, it is not moving. The slides aren't moving. Okay, I'll have to proceed like this. So, critical illness neuropathy is a part of ICU acquired weakness. There are two types of ICU acquired weakness. First is critical illness neuropathy, CIN, or critical illness polyneuropathy, CIP. And the second type is critical illness myopathy, that is CIM. We know that CIP must be distinguished from CIM because prognosis may vary, with CIM having a better prognosis than CIP. And CIP or CIM are usually diagnosed at Medical Research Council. This is a score which has been developed to grade the severity of muscle weakness. Like if we test the patient clinically, then we can only find out which group of muscles are involved. We can partially grade them. But MRC is some score. It is comprises of around 60 points, and if it is less, and it tests muscles across the 6 major joints, which includes shoulder, elbows, wrists, and then hip, knee, and ankle. So if the sum score is less than 48, then it is almost pathognomic for ICU acquired weakness. And if it is less than 36, then it is suggestive of severe kind of critical illness, ICU acquired weakness. Then the typical features of CIP are that it is distal. Once we are talking about neuropathy, we know that neuropathy is distal, while myopathy is proximal. So here we'll be discussing about neuropathy. So neuropathy is characteristically distal. It is axonal type compared with the other most common polyneuropathy which we see in the clinical practice. That is the most common type of GBS is demyelinating polyneuropathy. So we must remember this ICU acquired weakness is not demyelinating, it is axonal kind of weakness. Then it is sensory motor both. And the weakness is typically flaccid. It is polyneuropathy, multiple nerves are involved, and it affects limbs and respiratory muscles both. However, facial muscles are usually spared, but ophthalmoplegia may occur, that is, extraocular muscles may be involved. Incidence has been reported to be around 0 to 28% in various studies in the pediatric population. Like a number of cases of ICU acquired weakness have also been reported in patients with COVID-19 recovering from ICU, as I was going through some literature. But this scenario has not been seen in children per se up till now. But in children, the incidence has been reported between 0 to 28%. And a bimodal age distribution is seen in children, with more common being in less than 3 years of age and more than 10 years of age. Then pathophysiology is largely undetermined, but it is believed that there are two major events like microvascular injury, and the second is release of pro-inflammatory cytokines, which leads to the formation of microthrombi and cellular dysfunction, and ultimately mitochondrial dysfunction, and finally sodium channel inactivation. So what happens is that the penetration of toxic factors like cytokines and all occurs into the nerves, and then the mitochondria of the neurons, it gets disturbed and starts dysfunctioning, and finally it leads to sodium channel inactivation, leading to failure of generation of action potential and nerve activation. So the above three factors finally lead to axonal degenerating changes, and this leads to axonal polyneuropathy. Then the risk factors for CIP are sepsis, systemic inflammatory response syndrome, then hyperglycemia, which is very, very common. Like polyneuropathy is very commonly seen in patients with diabetes mellitus, especially type 2 diabetes mellitus. Then multi-organ failure, mechanical ventilation, renal replacement therapy, organ transplantation, and drugs. Most notorious are steroids, aminoglycoside antibiotics, and neuromuscular blocking agents. Then burns, again, which is a cause of systemic inflammatory response syndrome. And immobility. Immobility does not per se cause CIP, but it is a risk factor. Matlab, like patients with prolonged immobilization, if they develop CIP, and rather if they are exposed to the above risk factors, then they are prolonged to develop even more severe morbidity. And then finally, there is use of extracorporeal life support, including renal replacement, which we had mentioned earlier. The clinical course is like if the children with preceding risk factors, they may start developing bilateral symmetrical weakness, with distal being more than proximal between day 4 to 26 of their ICU admission. Prolonged immobility, as I had earlier discussed, it can lead to functional decline due to profound weakness, compression neuropathies, muscle atrophy, and joint contractures. So the typical pathophysiology, which we had discussed earlier, is not seen because of prolonged immobility per se, but it is a risk factor. Then facial muscles, as already discussed, tend to be spared, and therefore if you give a painful stimulus, the child will not wince. Contraction of facial muscles will not take place. So it is not always the clinical examination which will help us identify whether or not ICU acquired weakness has occurred if we are looking only at the pain score scale of the child. Recovery in CIP, CIM is spontaneous but variable, and it can range from full recovery to persistent weakness to death, and depends on lots of factors. For example, timely recognition, timely intervention, good physiotherapy, and removal of the causative etiology. Clinical implications are very important. Why do we need to identify ICU acquired weakness? Because it leads to increased need of ventilatory support, and then increased duration of ICU stay, increased duration of hospital stay, increased mortality rates, increased morbidity, and increased economic burdens to the family. So the diagnosis involves certain non-invasive tests and invasive tests. The non-invasive tests include the nerve conduction velocity studies and the electromyography. Nerve conduction velocity studies will show reduced amplitude of compound muscle action potentials in those muscles which are supplied by the nerves which have been affected. And sensory nerve action potentials, they are also reduced if the sensory nerves are involved. And then if we do electromyography in patients with ICU acquired weakness or CIP, then we find fibrillation potentials, positive sharp waves, and large and polyphasic motor unit potentials. These three are the characteristic of EMG of muscles which are supplied by the nerves which have been affected by CIP. So they have been supplied by these degenerating axons, and then they contract irregularly, producing fibrillation potentials, sharp waves, and large polyphasic motor unit potentials. And to confirm it, we have an invasive test also, that is nerve biopsy, which will show the characteristic histological change of axonal degeneration. The management is again It comprises of two aspects: the management in acute setting and that in chronic setting. In acute setting, we must remember that we must not try to we must try to wean the child early from the ventilator and try and mobilize the child early. Nutritional, good antioxidant and insulin therapies are required for hyperglycemia. Antioxidants like vitamin C and zinc. In-bed therapies, for example, range of motion, bed positioning and splinting, forms of passive physiotherapy, and mobility therapies like sitting at the edge of bed and making the child try to stand, sit to stand, transfer, ambulation, and play. All these are forms of active physiotherapy. In chronic setting, obviously, prolonged physical medicine and rehabilitation therapies need to be done. Then there are certain advances in the management of CIP. Actually, there have been certain new scales which have been devised to assess the level of morbidity which the patient is suffering from. And these are referred to as functional outcome defining measures. And these are 3 scales. First is the pediatric overall performance scale. Then there is pediatric cerebral performance category. And finally, there is functional status scale. And there are certain new diagnostic modalities as well. First is the direct muscle stimulation, in which if it is a CIP, then compound muscle action potentials will not be reduced, they will be preserved, but that will not happen in patients with CIN. So especially if we are testing muscles which are not involved. Like I'm saying, muscles which are not supplied by the nerves which have been involved in CIP. And there are certain new biomarkers also, for example, MIR 181A. To prevent, we must use the corticosteroids, NMDAs, and other neurotoxic drugs at the minimal possible dose and for the minimal duration possible. Give intensive nutritional support to the child as long as he is in ICU and otherwise as well. And avoid hyperglycemia at all costs, because we know that hyperglycemia is very notorious in causing neuropathy. And this is the suggested reading. And thank you all.
So, Dr. Surbhi, in nutshell, if we want to manage a case of neuropathy in your PICU, how do you proceed? I mean, in general, what are the usual recommendation as an intensivist you apply? If you go on around, how do you proceed? How do you identify? How do you proceed? And how do you evaluate?
Okay. So, frankly speaking, I haven't encountered any case of this ICU acquired weakness, but yes, daily clinical examination is mandatory, even if the patient is not of any CNS or neurological disorder. Then also, if the patient is ventilated or has the risk factors which have been enumerated in this, a complete neurological examination, including the examination of power and everything, is mandatory. And once you screen the patient clinically that he is developing some kind of power, some muscle weakness, some weakness in the limbs or in the respiration, in that case, you must keep a high vigil and go for electrodiagnostic tests like NCV and EMG. And in case you find that there is some abnormality in NCV or EMG, then you must try and identify what is the causative factor which you are implicating drug which you are giving, and try and stop that drug and maybe remove the underlying etiology, along with giving supportive therapies like good nutrition and physiotherapy and antioxidants as well.
What are the differentials which we should keep when we encounter a patient with evolving neuropathy?
Depends on the underlying etiology, sir. Like if the patient is, suppose we have a patient of, usually patients with DKA are not ventilated. They are, it is said that you should not intubate patients with DKA. They should be on spontaneous respiration itself. But suppose if the patient is intubated and requires a longer duration of ICU stay, then in that case, you know that diabetes can lead to polyneuropathy itself, or it can be an ICU acquired kind of weakness. So you differentiate it, keeping in mind, okay, the etiology is this, but then there are certain differentiating features which will help you, like polyneuropathy and diabetes would not develop in acute setting. It will only develop if it has been long standing. For example, HbA1c is something which can help us, is a lab test which can help us in determining whether it has been like, okay, there's one more point to it. It has just come to my mind. Like on admission, if the patient is having some weakness, then it is obviously because of the underlying etiology. And if it is not, if he develops during the course of illness, then also you may think that it is a kind of ICU acquired weakness if you have ruled out other things.
Now we have one question which says, and in fact this is a common question, if we receive a child in PICU and we notice that this child is having neuropathy and there is a hospital stay and has been shifted to get admitted in our ICU. Now if we have this kind of patient, how do we evaluate them? The question is, how do we evaluate neuropathy versus neurological disorder with sequelae?
Okay, clinical history is very important. In this case, examination might not help you, but history will definitely help you, and the investigations would also not be help you in differentiating per se whether it is a primary neurological illness or it is a sequelae. This is what someone is asking, I guess. Is this what someone is asking?
So basically, critical illness neuropathy versus other neurological disorder with sequelae, history is very important. Agreed.
History is very important, sir. And critical illness neuropathy will not be present at the onset. Like the example which someone has asked me, like if the patient is being referred to you from some other hospital, then we must ensure what was the condition when the patient was admitted to that hospital. And since when did the patient started developing weakness? If he has started developing weakness after some time. See, one thing that CIP is not very common first thing. We should not keep it as one of the early. I'm telling you, I have in my career of around 12 to 15 years, I haven't seen any case of CIP per se. But yes, since it is not a very new, but yes, people have recognized it later with the use of longer duration of steroids and MBAs and aminoglycoside antibiotics, etc., colistin and all. We must keep this in mind also, but it is not very common. And then the second thing is that the patient develops this during the course of illness, like other parameters are improving, but neurological weakness begins to develop. Then you can think that ICU acquired weakness is one of the possibilities.
Okay. I think for better understanding, when we have a differential in mind, we should ask targeted questions as well. So let me frame it this way: if a patient is shifted to our ICU from a different ICU where he or she was staying for 14 days, ventilated, and we receive the child and there are no reflexes, and we presume that there are pressure source ulcers, everything is there. At the same time, we are keeping a differential of critical illness neuropathy because of persistent ventilator requirement and moribund state. At this moment, if there is a history, what other history should we ask to rule out neurological disorders with sequelae? I believe this is the important clinical aspect of this very presentation. Do you what would you comment on this very problem? In if you're facing it in emergency and you want to take this child to ICU, how will you intervene?
I'm not getting the question. You mean to say, sir, that neurological illness with some sequelae?
The
I don't
differential
think
of
there is.
critical illness neuropathy with neurological illnesses with sequelae.
Your voice.
If at all there is
Neurological disorder with sequelae. Okay, so can the person be more specific which neurological disorder he thinks is there in which neuropathy develops as a sequelae? So the symptoms are very, again, I must say that the stress on clinical history is very important. Like the patient would initially present with symptoms of neurological disease, or what kind of neurological disease maybe you are talking about in which polyneuropathy is developing as a sequelae. Polyneuropathy developing as a sequelae of some neurological illness.
what are the illnesses in neurology which have neuropathy as a presentation?
Neuropathy it is a broad category of illnesses itself, and it has a number of etiologies. neuropathies are themselves a diagnostic, are a separate set of neurological illnesses. These are the involvement of peripheral nerves.
Agreed. So we have to, our differential should be consistent with our findings. And when we think about critical illness neuropathy, we should also think about those illnesses which have neuropathy as one of their component. So Charcot-Marie neuropathy is a neuropathy which goes undiagnosed, but there is small muscle atrophy involved. This type of patient, if come to ICU with some other illnesses and they have underlying Charcot-Marie, then they will have this kind of illnesses as well. So we have to rule out, and we have to take detailed history of their earlier presentations previously in OPDs, so that we have a differential that this is not critical illness neuropathy, but it is neuropathy under evaluation with critical stay, with hospital stay for critical illness for which treatment is ongoing.
Yes,
Likewise.
sir. So this is what I was trying to stress upon, that clinical history taking is very important. This is what I feel. If we take the history in patient with Charcot-Marie disease,
what all histories would you like to take in a case who comes to emergency department with history of, let's say, unable to have pressure ulcers and unable to move his or her limbs and reflexes are sluggish, and you consider it to be probably a case of neuropathy but on ventilator? So what all histories will you take?
What all histories? The onset of disease and the progression of disease itself would tell us whether the, if we are talking about hereditary motor sensory neuropathy or Charcot-Marie disease, then maybe the respiratory involvement is very prominent, maybe, as far as I remember.
Okay. Any other differential?
Differentials for ICU acquired weakness.
Yeah, let Dr. Lokesh help us in this.
Actually, I got a call. I was attending from phone, so I was not able to hear what discussion is going on. Can you update?
We are discussing critical illness neuropathy, and the question is, how do we differentiate between critical illness neuropathy from other neurological disorder with sequelae? To be specific, other neurological disorder with neuropathy as one of the component. How do we differentiate critical illness neuropathy from such kind of elements?
So it's totally depend on the history only. If you acquired weakness previously, the child will be absolutely okay. History wise, no neuromuscular weakness history will be there, and the only completely normal child presenting with complaints of for some other, like any other illness. But problem occurs when child present with neurological symptoms like acute onset flaccid paralysis, or maybe you can say Guillain-Barré syndrome. Then you cannot differentiate because if the child develops after 10 days, he is fine, he is recovering from GBS, but he has developed critical illness, neuropathy or myopathy, whatever you say, terminology give to it. If the child develops concurrently this also, then it is very hard to differentiate because nerve conduction findings will be same. Only thing which can help us is, like, if on admission a child with GBS is showing demyelinating variant of GBS, and after 10 days, if you do repeat a nerve conduction, it shows a axonal variant, then you can differentiate. Okay, definitely at admission he was demyelinating variant, so it could not convert itself. The illness cannot convert itself. So there must be some component of critical illness weakness. So otherwise it is very difficult. So sometimes we face difficulty in cases when neurological children, like children presenting with neurological complaints gets ventilated for longer time, for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Then definitely they will have some component of ICU acquired weakness. And it is very difficult at that time. It is part of the illness or it is ICU acquired weakness. But what we do is we do supportive treatment. So there is no clear-cut specific treatment mentioned for ICU acquired weakness in literature. But what we can try is nutrition. which is every book mention or every article mention nutrition has to be proper. Then magnesium levels should be normal. You have to check for magnesium levels. Whenever they are low, you have to correct them. And good nutrition, good rehabilitation program. That is the only thing. There is no specific treatment also for this condition. So diagnosing this condition is mainly of epidemiological importance, and as well as you need to identify that acute illness is over and now this is ICU acquired weakness, and you can shift out the child from ICU for the rehabilitation program. That is the only advantage of identifying this illness, because there is no specific treatment. Even if you identify, you don't have any drugs to treat it. So you identify it, you label it that like is it ICU acquired weakness, but then you start your rehabilitation and rebuilding program for the child. So this is the practical difficulty we face as a pediatric neurologist. So whenever you get any suspicion of ICU acquired weakness, so even if you don't have facility for nerve conduction EMG, or you cannot do it, child is not shiftable, there's no hurry to do it. You can, if you have a possibility, you keep the possibility, and that you treat it like ICU acquired weakness, because there is no separate treatment for that. Any other specific doubts if you have?
Dr. Surbhi herself has added that, can you please clarify which neuro illness shall have a neuropathy as a sequel?
No, sir. Actually, I was asking this Dr. Ravi Teja Jaladi, who had asked this question to me, how to differentiate critical illness neuropathy from other neurological disorders with sequelae. I don't think any neurological disorder has neuropathy as a sequelae. This is what I was trying to say earlier as well. And
very correct. Dr. Surbhi is telling whatever he's telling. There is no neurological disorder which has neuropathy as a sequelae. So either the disorder has neuropathy in it at onset only. Yes. At onset only the neuropathy is there. Otherwise, it is not possible to have a sequelae of neuropathy. The child can have.
In my opinion, Dr. Ravi Teja wanted to know about neuropathy as a presentation in the disorder versus critical illness neuropathy, how to identify that. And I believe the sequelae word was but just typed, but the context is not pretty clear. What he wanted to meant what he wanted to ask here was neurological disorder with neuropathy versus critical illness neuropathy, how to identify them. Like what
so
you
that is very easy and straightforward. It's just history.
Yes,
so child present with the neuromuscular weakness history. So there is no confusion. ICU acquired weakness, at least the minimum period which has been reported in literature is 3 days. It will not set in before 3 days.
Can we is there any specific intervention for patient care in ICU when we manage them to prevent, although it is rare?
So, as Dr. Surbhi has mentioned that the main culprits are over steroid use and neuromuscular blocking agents. So atracurium,
judicious usage of these two agents is important. And while we are managing COVID, left, right, center, we are taking steroid as the mainstay of treatment. This is new illness which is evolving, where incidence is going to increase, because we are now seeing more of the problem, more of mucormycosis. Epidemiologically, that illness was associated with more of steroid usage. Likewise, critical illness neuropathy is also associated with more liberal uses of steroid. So this should be a caution for all those who are practicing ICU, that when we give steroid, we should also understand that it's a double-edged sword. It comes with it has own problem. This is one problem which we should also keep in mind.
So there is one important message about critical illness weakness is that critical illness weakness can involve respiratory missiles, but it is a rarity.
Yeah.
So if the child is not coming out of ventilator, it is not because of critical illness weakness per se. So always think about your diagnosis. If you are just attributing your that child is not able to wean, we are not able to wean the child from ventilator to critical illness weakness, then it is not correct. So most of the time it must have, like, the primary illness is responsible for the, like, not, you are not able, inability to wean the child from the ventilator, not the critical illness weakness, because critical illness weakness usually have appendicular weakness as predominant predominant weakness, and as it is highlighted that cranial nerves are hardly involved, as well as respiratory muscles, but that can, like, exceptions can be there, but in practicality we don't see it very often.
I would like to add one point over here, that dose dependency and association of critical illness neuropathy with dose dependency is not there. Like it can happen with maybe say 3 doses of amikacin, or maybe may not happen even with 10 doses of amikacin with the patient having similar risk factors. So it is not that if there is a certain amount of cumulative dose has been administered, only then will the patient develop the risk factor for ICU acquired weakness. It is not so.
Yes,
So
very
this
true.
is one thing I wanted
yes, very
to
true.
highlight.
That is why it can develop as early as 3 days and as late as 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Definitely dose dependence is not there.
Is the answer in this, and that depends on the genetic makeup of a person.
So there must be some HLA predisposition for that, responsible for that. I'm sure, because some people will develop, some don't develop with the same medication, same history, same illness. So there must be some HLA phenotyping or HLA makeup of that particular person. But I will comment about the presentation. It was very good. So this is what we want. The presentation should be to the point, and it should address the discussion points. It should address the topic in as a whole, and it should not be too long and it should not be too small. So
Thank you, sir.
It was perfectly made, and it has all the scientific content also. You should look for PEDCAMP study. It was done by PGI. I will send you in the group only after the this Zoom meeting gets over. I will send that article to you. It is one of the largest prospective cohort of which has tried to look into this type of weakness. Okay, so that is the one of the Indian study which you can include your references in the future. So otherwise it was a very good and very nicely presented topic.
Thank you, sir.
I think it was a subtopic. I have one question in my mind. As a clinician, we manage pressure sores very frequently, and I have seen 2 cases with critical illness neuropathy in Gangaram, where pressure sore was one of the problem for continuous fever, which gives us an inclination that probably we are dealing with a factor where we have this kind of illness which is evolving. And so Dr. Surbhi, have you managed pressure sores, and how do you manage them? Because that will be one manifestation when we have some person with illnesses where the movement of limbs are completely dependent on nursing staff or other people.
Management of pressure sores you're asking, sir?
Yes, I'm asking management of pressure sores.
The pressure sores are first of all graded as per the severity, and there are around 4 grades, and the treatment depends on the grade of the pressure sore. If the pressure sore is just grade 1, say minimal erythema and all, then keeping the area dry and free of pressure and using the water bags beneath the pressure areas, that only suffices. And if as the severity increases up to say grade 4, sometimes even surgical debridement has also been done in our hospital. Otherwise, grade 3 sores are usually healed by surgical dressings and conservative management, and grade 1 and 2, they usually don't require any specific intervention, just keeping the area dry and free of pressure. And sometimes we use this powder also for this clotrimazole powder also for application for making it dry.
So prevention stands to be the most.
This is the treatment.
Yeah, agreed. Treatment and prevention. Like as an intensivist, when we deal with the critically ill patient, why I'm stressing upon this is because I believe we are now going to see a lot of illnesses which have been in less less reported, less noted also. This is one of them. Mucor is second. So when we deal with critically ill patient ventilated for longer duration, having this component as one of their problem, we will be looking at pressure source, and that for those who are new to ICU should understand that moribund patient who and a good intensive care always prevents this kind of problem. But in case we have pressure source, we have to manage them, and we have to evaluate, we have to do a good neurological evaluation in such cases specifically, because those two cases which I have seen, they were identified with pressure source, and when further evaluated, both were having critical illness neuropathy. There could be a correlation, there could not be a correlation. Dr. Lokesh would be the best person to guide us on that aspect. But in my experience in ICU, pressure source with a patient who is on ventilator for a longer duration, this one aspect should be checked upon. And like Saini said has reported, magnesium is very important. Magnesium levels are very important to be managed, and B12. This is the other element which has a specific role in treating neurological insults, neuropathy as an insult in critically ill patients.
Prevention would require the use of air beds, air mattresses, and
Yes.
changing the position of the child frequently means hourly to 2 hourly, depending on the availability of the staff and nursing supervisors.
Yes.
And also, if it is not possible, like in government hospital in KGMC when we were there, then since the facility of so many staffs and so many doctors weren't there, and this availability of air mattresses was also not there, we used to fill gloves with water and then used to keep it below the pressure areas. The pressure areas, the bony prominences, which come in contact with the surface of the bed.
Yes.
These are the pressure areas, like the posterior superior iliac spine, the nape of the neck, and occiput.
Scapular margins.
Yes, these are the areas in which we used to keep it. So, like in resource limited settings or in resource rich settings, we must just keep a vigil and try to do as much as possible.
Yes, agreed. Dr. Lokesh, anything else which you would like to add here? Great.
So, okay, and if anyone wants to ask any specific doubt, they can ask. So I think question which has come to Dr. Ravi Teja's mind might be that some of the time we are not sure of the diagnosis at the time of presentation in ICU. Yes. And like a myasthenia child can present in crisis, and we don't know till that time that the child has myasthenia. A 10-year-old suddenly comes with bulbar dysfunction and respiratory weakness and can have myasthenia which was undiagnosed, or nobody knows in the family also. First presentation can be in crisis. So in those children, it is very challenging to know that this weakness is a part of like it is critical illness weakness or it is something else. So that is why this investigation which Dr. Surbi has mentioned, like nerve conduction EMG, which will help. So at least you will get an idea, like because in myasthenia, nerve conduction will be normal, EMG will be normal. So you will get some idea, okay, that is this type of illness. This investigation will actually helps to rule out other things.
Yes.
Because otherwise they are non-specific. In any neuromuscular weakness, they will show some changes.
Agreed. Fine. So I think now we have no other questions, and with this we will conclude this talk. It was a very crisp and a very concise presentation. Topic is although a small topic, but very important. and those who are.
I think we should discuss small topics only, because
Yes.
then there can be discussion on that.
Yes, yes. The clinical pointers for Dr. Surbhi, in a summary, can you summarize the entire talk in 5 most important clinical points for all of us?
First thing is, sir, that you must keep a vigil in all patients who are critical, and especially the patients who are having the risk factors like sepsis, SIRS due to any other feature, for example, burns. In short, whatever patients who are admitted to the PICU, you must keep a vigil and do a complete clinical examination daily, which does not include the clinical examination of the system with which the patient has come to you, system or the disease of which the patient has come to you, but also a neurological examination, especially if the patient is on mechanical ventilator or if he is receiving any of the implicative drugs. And the second thing is that the earliest you find that the patient is developing some kind of weakness, then you must first of all try and stop the offending drug which you feel is the offending agent, and simultaneously go for examine this investigation if possible, including nerve conduction velocity and electromyography. And by the time the results and the investigations are done, the results are reported, you must start with the supportive treatment, which includes the nutritional management, giving antioxidants, managing hyperglycemia, and good physiotherapy. And counseling is also very important for the parents, because and the same, the parents must know, like the parents may get worried, like the patient, my child had not come with this particular problem or this particular complaint, then why has he developed, and may start blaming the hospital. So you have to keep the parents in great confidence, and you must be very clear with them. And that's all. And the prevention of bed sores, as you said, sir, the bed sores are also a sign of sensory neuropathy, actually.
Yes.
So if sensory neuropathy is going unnoticed, the patient will develop some kind of pressure ulcer at the site of the innervation of the nerves. This kind of pressure ulcer, this kind of bed sore will not develop at pressure points. It would develop at areas which are not particularly at the gravity dependent areas or the bony prominences, but it will present at the areas which are being supplied by the nerves which have undergone neuropathy. So this is the differentiating feature. I think these are the 5 points, sir.
Yes, and third is nutrition. Once you identify them, you provide them with good nutrition, maintain maintain normoglycemia, and maintain normal magnesium levels to support. B12 in clinical practices, I have seen results, but I'll try to find out a valid reference. And there are a couple of good articles on neuropathy. Like Dr. Lokesh has said, and also most of the studies are from adult side, where they have tried to intervene and how to proceed further in a protocol format. I'll share that as well on the group, so that now with this context we can also learn from their experiences as well. In my opinion, in coming 6-7 months, there will be this as a new form of problem which intensivists will face. Let's hope we don't face this kind of problem, because like you said, it is very difficult for a clinician to explain to the parents how this has happened when it is not there in the beginning. So we have to have a very good rapport with the parents, and we have to be very vigilant on examinations. Good history, good examination always helps in better outcome for the patient, rightly said. With this, we will conclude our talk, and let us try to take such good presentations in future as well. Thank you, Dr. Surbhi. Thank you, Lokesh sir, for guiding us. Thanks all of you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. And thank you, Lokesh sir, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.